Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I am Kathryn, and we are so back. I know we missed Austria, but I was out in the wilderness during Austria. We'll talk about Austria in a moment. I was actually very optimistic about my ability to record as soon as I got back from being out into the wilderness and hiking for 8 miles and then driving 3 hours back from said wilderness yesterday. So we're just going to do this all at once, which I think I even said I was going to do at the end of the Austria predictions, which it's going to be fine. But anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss a moment of me inflicting my motorsport opinions upon the greater population. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. Now, Austria. I watched that race while getting ready to leave camp and listened to the final lap of the race in the car while at the drive-through line at Starbucks. And it seemed like it was a very interesting, exciting end to the race. And at the same time, I got my breakfast. So obviously we had the priorities all covered. I thought it was really interesting and funny. I saw this stat that says George Russell has only won on tracks this season in countries that start with AUST and ends with the letter A, which is accurate. It's funny how George has had a very strong season, but has only actually won twice this year. Once, of course, in Australia, and then, of course, last week in Austria, where he really didn't do anything. He just drove his car off into the sunset and waited for everything to happen all around him, which is a thing that happens. And I think Max Verstappen really did most of the heavy lifting when it came to, let's call it bringing in the thrills of this race. Obviously, we had the early fights with Lewis before the Ferrari decided that it just didn't want to have pace anymore. And those late fights with Kimi for P2. Kimi kind of came pretty late to that party, but it could have been pretty intriguing to see how the Kimi-Max battle would have gone had they had a couple of extra laps. And obviously, Kimi Antonelli is looking to maintain his gap over George as much as possible. And those 3 points that Max got over him could be make or break. Obviously, we had some make or break moments last year in Austria in 2025 going down the stretch. So that is something to just keep note of in your mental brain as we go through the rest of the season, because obviously we do have a long way to go. And there are still rumors and there are still rumblings about Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, one of them or both of them attempting to return to the calendar later this year before the season actually ends. So this season could be just as long as we expect, just not in the format that we expected. Of course, we couldn't see the outcome of Cadillac's brand new shiny engine updates because the brakes decided that they wanted to just catch on fire at the beginning of the race. So neither of them had any meaningful driving time with those new engines in the back of their car. Hopefully we see something different in Silverstone, but we never know with these brand new teams. And of course, for Ferrari, it really was a nightmare post Barcelona. Obviously, they started P2, P3 and finished the race with Lewis Hamilton in P5, nowhere near the podium, and Charles Leclerc in P8. So we go very hot and cold with Ferrari. It's either it was great or it was terrible. It was great or it was terrible. And I think at the moment they're thinking it is terrible, and we will see how things go this week at Silverstone. But depending if you're actually a Ferrari fan or not, you might be feeling optimistic about this week, or maybe you're not. I don't know. We'll see. And then, of course, it was also another double points weekend for my friends over at Racing Bulls. This is the team they told you not to think about t-shirt, which is very nice and very comfortable. And I picked it out of my clean laundry because I just got back from the wilderness and have no clean clothes. Anyway, moving on to my Austria Grand Prix predictions. I got one right. I picked George Russell for pole, and I picked it correctly. As for everything else, it was a mixed bag. I did pick most of the podium, though in the wrong order. I picked a Kimi Lewis Max podium, and of course we know it was a George Max Kimi podium, so I just had a Mercedes driver replaced by a former Mercedes driver, and I would have gotten the podium order if nothing. In P10, I had Gabriel Bortoleto, who ended up in P11, and Arvid Lindblad was in P10, which I thought was interesting. The new team boss at Audi said that Austria was one of the team's best performances all season long, which I felt that they had a pretty strong start to the season in Australia. Obviously, it's the only time they've scored points this year, and they've really been out of the fight with Haas ever since. And of course, now Haas is also in the same little we're not doing well itis either, but it was a Audi 1112, which could bode well. Obviously, we know how well Nico Hülkenberg did last year, even though it wasn't technically Audi, but you know what I mean. It was basically Audi in a different hat with a weirder name. But it will be interesting to see if Audi is going to be able to build on the momentum from Austria going into this weekend at Silverstone, which I think is going to be a very interesting race with these new cars. And then, of course, in my surprises and dumbs, my surprise of the weekend was that Cadillac was going to get its first points, which did definitely not happen. And my dumb was that George was going to get hit by the reliability bug, which he very much did not. Now, a piece of news that came out during the Austrian Grand Prix weekend was that Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who's the current president of the FIA, has won his approval to get rid of term limits. So previously, the presidency of the FIA had a certain amount of terms that you could be limited to. It was 3 terms of 4 years, which is plenty of time to do whatever damage you need to do to the sports that are under the FIA purview. But clearly, they have all agreed that that was not enough time for MBS to serve in this role. And so he is now going to be president until somebody can unseat him, which unfortunately is going to be very difficult. As you may remember, we covered the presidential elections last year, and the contender against Mohammed Ben Sulayem last year could not actually get onto the ballot, because in order to get onto the ballot, you need to have a qualified vice presidential candidate from every member country that is under the umbrella of the FIA. And in South America, there's like one person who's qualified, and it's Bernie Ecclestone's wife, and they are supporters of Mohammed Ben Sulayem. So they could not get the contender onto the actual ballot. So he had to bow out, which is not, don't get me wrong, it's absolute nonsense. And nonsense is a word I am using to replace by other words that are less kind about it. And I don't like it. And there's no getting rid of Mohammed Ben Sulayem. And that is kind of annoying, and incredibly annoying, and extremely annoying. So the continuing adventures of the FIA versus F1 are probably going to get worse. If you remember in our coverage of the Braun GP documentary on Hulu from a couple of years ago, and if you haven't watched that documentary yet, I have linked the episode up in the card and down in the comments. You watch the episode, also watch the documentary. But part of that, in 2009, when Braun made their season and did a one and done championship and then sold their souls to Mercedes in a sort, the F1 teams at the time were actually attempting to break away from the FIA and be a self-governing organization, but they were not able to do so because they couldn't get consensus from all of the teams. And the reason being is Braun GP, which basically Ross Braun bought the rights to the Honda F1 team for $1 from Honda when Honda left F1 for the 400th time because the economy was bad. Because remember, Honda loves being in F1 and in motorsports of all kinds when the money is good, but when the money is bad economically, they will scale back. And so that's when Braun bought the team for $1. And the FIA basically was leveraging the prize pool money that was earmarked for Honda based on their 2008 finish. And the FIA and Bernie Ecclestone, who was giving out the trophies on the Austria podium, which I did not watch, but had my dad texting me updates about. Apparently they let him out of the home. But Bernie Ecclestone basically said to Braun, we will give you the money if you do not agree to break away from the FIA, and F1 stays as an FIA sponsored sport. So they were one of those people that kind of stopped F1 from becoming a self-governing organization. It was a complicated time, I'll give it that. But I think that F1 is in a much better position if they want to say to the FIA that we want to peace out and take our support races with us. I think that they're in a much better financial standing now in 2026 than they were in 2008, 2009. So the writing may or may not be on the wall. MBS has to tread carefully. I don't think he has nearly as much power as Bernie Ecclestone did. And even with this power grab of ditching term limits, which is dumb. I mean, he'll go away at some point, but it's still dumb. Anyway, let's talk about the British Grand Prix. Last year at the British Grand Prix, we had a lot of excitement. So let's dive into my 60-ish second recap of Silverstone 2025. The McLaren 1-2, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri in that order because Papaya rules, was completely and rightfully overshadowed by Nico Hülkenberg's very first podium of his career in 239 starts, which is the current record for the longest wait at the podium. It was the first time since 2012 that there were no Mercedes drivers on the podium, and also the first time that Lewis Hamilton Verstappen was off the podium since 2013. It was also a double points day for Aston Martin, which is definitely not going to be happening anytime soon with the current car that they have, no matter how hard Adrian Newey tries, because the problem, of course, is the Honda engine. So that was a very exciting British Grand Prix. That was definitely less than 60 seconds, but we said it was going to be a 60-ish second recap, and that was Silverstone. Now, let's talk about the driver standings update. We didn't talk about it in the last episode because I forgot to talk about it, but let's talk about where the top 5 stands right now. Kimi Antonelli is 40 points up on teammate George Russell. George overtook Lewis again for P2. George is now down 171 points to 131 points in the championship race, and Lewis Hamilton is sitting 6 points back of George with 125 points because, he underperformed in Austria because Ferrari, shrug, question mark. And they are the only 3 drivers so far this season. And remember, the season is a little bit shorter than it should be. We should be at race 11. This is race 9. These are the only 3 drivers this season who have breached the 100-point mark. Could be very interesting as we go down the slate. But as we saw from Max Verstappen's performance and his finish at P2 in Austria with the Red Bull upgrades to the engine that they've brought, this championship could still be wide open. We have seen a 40-point lead be whittled away very quickly with the Max Verstappen versus Charles Leclerc. What was that, in 2022? So Kimi is by no means safe with his current lead, and it will be very interesting to see if it is just going to be Kimi v. George, or if it's going to be Kimi v. George v. Lewis, or if Max is going to join the party, or if one of the McLarens is going to join the party, perhaps Oscar Piastri, who's currently sitting in P4 of the championship. We'll see. And if you have not noticed yet, of the 22 drivers, 4 drivers have yet to score their first points this season. Nico Hülkenberg, Valtteri Bottas, Sergio Perez. Obviously, those 2 are in the Cadillac. They're looking for points, but that's not the priority right now. And of course, in the bottom is the one and only Lance Stroll. Okay. Anyway, also, he's got a shiny copper-colored helmet as part of one of the Aston Martin sponsorships for this weekend. It's interesting. Arvid Lindblad has a very interesting hand-drawn art collaboration helmet that he will be debuting this weekend for his first home race as an F1 driver, which I think is pretty cute. But to speak on the 2026 liveries, I have some thoughts about the 3 teams that have so far announced that they're bringing new liveries. And our shocker of my actual, oh my God, I actually like this livery, it's pretty cool. The shocker is with our friends at McLaren. As we know, McLaren can do no right in my eyes unless it's regarding Oscar Piastri, which they choose not to do for reasons, but they are doing a green and white livery to honor the 1966 Bruce McLaren car from their inaugural season. Obviously, they just had their 1000th Grand Prix race earlier this season at Monaco, and so now they are continuing to commemorate their founder, Bruce McLaren. And this car is actually really nice. It is a little too Google Chromey for me. I mean, I know that you have to keep the sponsorships on and the sponsorships happy because they give so much money to the team in order to have their names plastered on the sides of the cars. But I think there's a little too much of the Google sponsorship on the side pods compared to the green of the Bruce McLaren car. But it looks really good. I really enjoyed it. You can be as shocked as I am. And I think that the best view is the view of the car that we get on TV. I think it'll play really well. Typically, we've seen a lot of liveries, including the one I'm going to speak on next, that do a lot of stuff to the car on the sides that we really don't see as much on camera as fans. And even if you're at the track, I can't imagine you're going to see some of it because it's very subtle, like the Williams Union Jack livery, which gives us nothing. I looked at that livery announcement and said, where is the Union Jack that they mentioned is going to be on their car? And you look very tiny on the side of the nose on that little strip there's a little bit of muted blue, white, and red for the Union Jack flag. But I mean, it's really, and I mean, the race suits that they're going to be wearing are much better. It was another one of like, where is the difference? I mean, you can see as I post the picture of the livery on screen that if you didn't know, like, there's more Union Jack colors in the background of this graphic than there is the actual Union Jack on the car. It's kind of like when Red Bull came out with that Silverstone livery from a few years ago that I really, really hated, where it was just a little bit of red splatter paint on the side of the car that you could barely see. Like, this is just as bad, Williams. So take note The Cadillac American flag livery is showing how it's done, because it's also a little bit abstract. They didn't just plaster an American flag to the side of the car like Haas has done in the past. But as part of Cadillac being an American brand and celebrating America's 250th anniversary, which is hilarious that they're doing it in the UK on 4th of July weekend, considering, all of American history. But it looks pretty cool as a car that we're never going to see on the broadcast because the Cadillac is slow. But livery designers in general take note. This is a very well done, colorful car, especially considering how much I love the car when it is just black and white, and the way they did that split tone that I'm still obsessed with and is still my 2026 livery of the year. You can see my livery rankings above and down below. But I think it's a great livery for all that it's, very Americanish. Not, like I said, not that the car's going to amount to anything, but, coming to this weekend, we have a lot of really interesting storylines. I think first and foremost, Max Verstappen has been talking about how this track is and how it's going to be interesting to drive this generation of cars on track and how well it's going to go. And it's either going to go really well or it's going to go really, really badly. So we'll see. And I think the biggest question, considering George Russell's struggles the last few races prior to Austria, is he going to maintain that momentum, or are we going to have another weekend where the winner from the previous week, Lewis Hamilton in Barcelona, is going to just absolutely lay an egg in the race following? And considering this is George's home race, how much more pressure is that going to put on him? So I think that's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on, and whether or not Kimi Antonelli is going to grow his 40-point lead or if it's going to continue shrinking. And I think it really is going to be a toss-up, and I think is going to be more of a concern of the Mercedes reliability than it is going to be, honestly, anything else. So we'll see. And then, of course, the real question is, will Red Bull be able to replicate their success in Austria after those engine upgrades, which were pretty massive? Or was that a one-off and they're just really good at their home track? So there's a lot of question marks. Ferrari had the same question going into Austria of, is Ferrari going to maintain the momentum from Barcelona? And that answer was resounding no. So is Red Bull going to follow in those same footsteps? Is George going to follow in those same footsteps? We also have 5 British licensed drivers out of the 22 total drivers on the grid. Remember, Alex Albon is British, but he drives under a Thai license. And how many of them are going to end up on the podium at home? How many of them are going to end up in the points? How many of them are going to see any kind of success? Because we have Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari, Ollie Bearman at Haas, Lando Norris at McLaren, George Russell, obviously, Mercedes, and Arvid Lindblad, like I said, first home Grand Prix as an F1 driver, very exciting for him. I personally think that my prediction is we're going to have one at most British driver on the podium. It's either going to be George or Lewis. Sorry, Lando, except not. And of the other British drivers to finish in the points, I think we might have 2. So I think a grand total of 3 British drivers. I also want to know what your predictions are. How many British drivers are going to be on the podium and how many British drivers are going to finish in the points? Are you predicting a British driver podium sweep? Let me know in the comments. And weather-wise, I don't think we're going to have much regarding weather. There is a 20% chance of rain Sunday morning, but it really just looks like it's going to be a dry weekend. But, it's the UK, so you really never know. Now, moving on to my Silverstone predictions. Let's see if I can go 2 weeks in a row with having at least one prediction actually correct. And so going for pole, I'm going with Kimi Antonelli, because it's either going to be Kimi Antonelli or it's going to be George Russell or it's going to be Lewis Hamilton, but I don't know. So I'm going with Kimi. We'll see. And my podium, I'm giving Kimi pole and then he's going to lose pole. So my podium is going to be a Max Verstappen win, a single British driver in Lewis Hamilton on the podium, and Kimi Antonelli in P3. I think it would be really funny if Red Bull does that thing again where they just ruin all the British drivers' day and all the Silverstone fans' day by having to play the Dutch and Austrian national anthem. So we'll see. I don't know. Anyway, going for P10, I'm going with Franco Colapinto. And for my biggest surprise of the weekend, I am hoping we have like a Nico Hulkenberg surprise podium type of moment this weekend on track. I'm not going to predict what that's going to be, but I want some sort of surprise podium moment for the weekend because it was just so much fun last year. And I was freaking out in the middle of breakfast and everyone's like, what's wrong with Kathryn? Oh, Kathryn's watching her Vroom cars again. And my dumb of the weekend is going to go to George Russell. Again, I don't know if that's because I forgot when I was doing these predictions or if I legitimately think George is going to fall to the pressures at home, but it's probably going to be both. But either way, the British Grand Prix always gives us something, so I'm really excited. We are also going to be seeing the F1 Academy debut this weekend in Silverstone, which I think it's bananas that F1 Academy has not driven at Silverstone yet. I didn't actually realize that until I looked it up today doing my rundown, which also our F1 Academy British Grand Prix preview will be out probably Thursday morning. I think this is coming up Wednesday night. So Wednesday night, Thursday morning, it's going to be out soon. Don't forget to hit the bell for notifications if you're watching this on YouTube so you don't miss a video. And our Silverstone reaction will be out on Monday. Yeah, definitely Monday, because Sunday's going to be a big day. Secret for the kids. Don't tell the kids. Sunday is P Day. Don't worry if you don't understand that. But it's a big secret surprise. So don't tell anybody. Anyway, that's what I've got for you today. Don't forget to tune into the F1 Academy predictions that are going to be out in sometime in the not too distant future. And I will see you in the next one.